All right, let's dive right in. If you're an assurance professional, you know the landscape is changing fast. There's a new global standard on the block, ISSA 5000, and it's a genuine game changer for sustainability reporting. Today, we're going to lay the essential groundwork, focusing on those critical first steps, the foundations and preconditions you absolutely have to get right before an engagement even gets off the ground. And this is our guide, our source of truth, the official standard, right from the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board. You should think of this as the new blueprint, the definitive rulebook that's going to shape pretty much every sustainability assurance engagement from now on. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get a quick overview of the new standard itself. Then we'll tackle the massive difference between reasonable and limited assurance. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of defining the scope, and we'll wrap up with the absolute must-haves, meeting the preconditions for taking on the work. Okay, so let's start with the big question. Why now? Why ISSA 5000? Well, it all comes down to serving the public interest. The IASB's goal here is to create a solid, global baseline for this work. It's all about boosting the quality and consistency of sustainability assurance, which in the end builds that all-important public trust in what companies are reporting. And here's the date to circle on your calendar. This standard officially kicks in for reporting periods starting on or after December 15, 2026. Now, I know that might sound like it's a ways off, but believe me, given how significant this shift is, the time to start preparing is right now. All right, let's get into what is probably one of the most fundamental decisions you have to make in any engagement: the level of assurance. And this isn't just some technical box-ticking exercise. This choice literally dictates the nature, the timing, and the extent of every single procedure you're going to perform. It's paramount. So the standard gives us two very distinct levels. On one hand, you have reasonable assurance. Here, your goal is to knock down engagement risk to an acceptably low level so you can give a positive opinion. And to do that, your procedures have to be extensive. On the other hand, you've got limited assurance. The risk here is inherently higher. Your conclusion is worded differently. You're basically saying if anything popped up that looked wrong. And, as you'd expect, your procedures are much more limited. The key thing to remember is these aren't just slight variations. They are two fundamentally different types of engagements. But, and this is a really critical point straight from the standard itself, limited does not mean low quality. A limited assurance engagement still has to be meaningful. So what does that mean in practice? It means that in your professional judgment, the work you do has to boost the user's confidence to a degree that is, and I'm quoting here, clearly more than inconsequential. It has to add real, tangible value. Okay, so once we figured out our level of assurance, we have to define exactly what it is we're assuring. You can't start any work until the scope is perfectly clear. And that scope is really built on three core components: the matters, the information, and the criteria. First up, sustainability matters. Now, this is a pretty broad term. The easiest way to think about it is as the entire universe of topics an organization could possibly report on. Anything that gives you insight into their impacts, their risks, and their opportunities when it comes to the environment, society, or the economy. To bring that down from the 30,000-foot view, the standard gives us some really concrete examples. So we're not talking about abstract ideas anymore. We're talking about measurable topics like climate impacts and greenhouse gas emissions, what kind of energy a company is using, how it's managing water, and what it's doing to biodiversity. This is the what that you'll actually be evaluating. Right. So if you have something you need to measure, you're going to need a yardstick. And that's exactly what applicable criteria are. They're the benchmarks you use for your evaluation. The analogy to financial auditing here is perfect. These are effectively the GAAP or IFRS of the sustainability world. They're what ensure the reporting is consistent and comparable. But, and this is key, you can't just pick any criteria off the shelf. ISA 5000 is very clear that they have to be suitable. And to pass that test, the criteria need to have 5 specific characteristics. They have to be relevant to the user's decisions, complete in their scope, reliable enough for consistent measurement, neutral and free from bias, and finally, understandable to the people who are actually going to read the report. Running the criteria through this 5-point check is a core part of your job. Okay, on to our final section, which really brings everything together. We've set our assurance level, we've defined the scope. Now for the ultimate gatekeeper question. Should you even take on this engagement in the first place? This is the practitioner's critical go/no-go decision point. And it all comes down to this one question. is this engagement actually viable? Before you even start thinking about planning procedures, you have to stop and determine if a high-quality, credible assurance engagement is even possible in the situation. This is your very first checkpoint. And here's the checklist that will give you your answer. These are the key preconditions that absolutely must be in place. Are the sustainability matters clear and measurable? Do those suitable criteria we just talked about actually exist, and will users get to see them? And this one's huge. Will you have access to the evidence you need? Does management actually own its responsibility for the report? And finally, is there a rational purpose for doing this? If the answer to any of these is no, then you just can't move forward. So the big takeaway here is that all of this, evaluating assurance levels, defining the scope, confirming these preconditions, it is so much more than just a procedural warm-up. This is the absolute bedrock. It's the foundation that a credible, high-quality, and ultimately defensible sustainability assurance report is built on. If you get this part wrong, the whole thing is at risk. So we'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. ISA 5000 gives you the framework. It gives you the rules of the road, but it's your professional judgment in applying these rules that's actually going to build confidence in the market. So as you start to work with these new standards, the real question becomes, with these powerful foundations in place, how will you ensure trust in this new era of sustainability reporting?